Shalom, and welcome to Shikul Da'at. I'm Rabbi Josh Rose. Parshat Behar begins with a beautiful vision of the just society, the land the Israelites are to possess as one of the fulfillments of the covenant with God. The land of Israel is not to be treated as a human possession. Indeed, it belongs to the Creator of the universe and its dependents. All of us are to make sure that it is used in a way that expresses the divine ethic. All people are created in the divine image, and so have a right to a life with dignity and decency. As economic differences emerge following the settlement of the land, those differences are not to become permanent, and injustice is not to become prevalent. The sabbatical and the jubilee years, as well as the rules of lending, are to assure that. So I want to zoom in on a particular example related to the laws of lending, and it comes in the 35th verse of the first chapter of our Parsha. The Torah says, "V'chi yam'uch achicha um'ata yado imach, v'hechazakta bo, ger v'toshav v'chai imach. Al tikach me'ito neshech v'tarbit v'yareta me'elohecha, v'chei achicha imach." Which means, if your kinsman, that is, if your fellow person, being in straits, being in some kind of trouble, comes under your authority and you hold this person as though a resident alien, let him live by your side. Chai imach, let him live with you, is literally what that says. Do not extract from this person advance or accrued interest. Rather, fear your God. Let this person live by your side. Literally, let him live with you as your fellow, as your brother. So clearly, exploitation is off the table. The wealthier person here is not permitted to use a position of relative power to extract anything possible from the poor person. Interest is limited, and it's clear that there's supposed to be a spirit of cooperation. But what is the ethic that's really at the heart of this? What is ultimately one person's obligation to the other? The phrase "enable the other to live with you" or "enable him to live with you" has been used to get at that very question. Just to take two views, briefly, Ibn Ezra argues that it means if you become aware of the person's predicament, then you are obligated to help. So, you're out doing your thing and you don't see anybody, you don't hear about anybody who's in need. According to Ibn Ezra, it seems like you're okay. But you either hear about or you encounter somebody who's in real straits and needs a loan, then you need to help that person. And according to Ibn Ezra, that's what it means to have the person live with you. The Ramban, Nachmanides, takes a much more expansive view of this requirement, writing about the exact same command to enable the other to live with you. He says, it is a positive commandment to enable him to live. And from here we derive that we are commanded to save a life as a positive commandment. So those are kind of two examples from the medieval rabbinic commentaries that give you a sense of the debate. But the Talmud raises the stakes on the discussion by asking a fundamental question. Should we prioritize our own lives or the lives of others? Now, that may seem like a surprising leap, but it's not really. The Talmud is simply trying to get at the philosophical underpinnings of the Torah's social ethic. And that's something we forget to ask when we make decisions. What does this decision say about my core values? The Talmud goes there by citing a thought experiment that appears in a Baraita. It says, if two people are walking on a desolate path, and there's a jug of water in the possession of one of them, and the situation is such that if both drink from the jug, both will die because there's enough water. But if only one of them drinks, that person will eventually get to a settled area with more water. There is a dispute as to the halakha, that is, as to what we are supposed to do. Ben Petora taught, it is preferable that both of them drink and die, and let neither one of them see the death of the other. This was the accepted opinion until Rabbi Akiva came and taught that the verse that says, "And your brother shall live with you," again, that's from our Torah portion, indicates that your life takes precedence over the life of the other. Now, I don't think the Talmud is really trying to establish the law for a situation of two people dying in a desert. That wouldn't be very useful in daily life, and honestly, how often does that happen? I think instead, the Talmud is asking about the nature of self-interest. How do I balance my self-interest with the needs of the other? Ben Petura seems like the idealist here. The suffering of the other should be so intolerable to us that we should prefer to die rather than witness it. But there's something that should bother us about this. Ben Petura's position seems to avoid hard choices, to avoid the fact that life is actually made out of moral compromises. And in fact, the moral life is made of moral compromises. That is, very often to do the right thing, as we all know, means that we have to accept steps along the way that are not ideal. And listen, the result of Ben Petura's proposal is that both people die. That can't be the moral choice. But what about Akiva's? Akiva's idea is that your life should take precedence, and this doesn't seem ideal. We'd like to think of ourselves as being committed to unlimited compassion when called upon. The moral choice is to prioritize your own life, however, says Rabbi Akiva. But there's actually something really strange about this. You might remember that a couple of weeks ago, Rabbi Akiva said something very different. In the Parshat that we read a couple of weeks ago, the Torah tells us, Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your fellow as yourself. Rabbi Akiva famously says about that verse that it is the great principle of the Torah. What? If Akiva thinks you should love your fellow as yourself, why does he say in connection with this week's Torah portion that in this desert scenario that appears in the Talmud that your life should take precedence based on this verse in the Torah that we read this week? Well, the Chatam Sofer also notices this contradiction and resolves it by saying basically that there are two ways that we care for others. One is physical. And in this case, the idea that your life takes precedence is the rule that we use. I should take care of you, make sure you have what you need, look out for your security and your well-being, but ultimately, I'm obligated to care for myself. And if there's a choice if a choice, I should say, is imposed upon me, I'm obligated to care for myself. But we're also obligated to care for one another spiritually. And here, says the Chatam Sofer, Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your fellow as yourself, is the principle. He writes, one must explain that Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is referring to spiritual matters. And Akiva's teaching, your life comes first, which again is connected to our Torah portion, refers to physical matters. Regarding physical matters of this world, one's own needs takes precedence. But regarding the eternally important matters of learning Torah and spiritual pursuits, one is obligated to love and study with others, even if it will cause one to accomplish less. It is regarding this that Rabbi Akiva teaches this is the great principle of the Torah, that is, love your fellow as yourself, because regarding Torah study, this is the great principle directing one to learn with others, even if one could achieve more on one's own. So a different teacher, the Malbim, has a different approach to this problem, this contradiction of Rabbi Akiva. He sees love your neighbor as yourself as being limited already. Built into the Hebrew grammar of the sentence, he says, is a particular expression of love. The letter lamed, he says, makes all the difference. Ahavta l're'echa. Do you hear that? That lamed, the l? That lamed indicates that which we do to or for another. It is not that we are to care for them emotionally and spiritually on the same level that we care for ourselves. He says that that's impossible. That's just not how we are designed as beings. Rather, we are to try to work for the benefit of the other. That's a very different thing. Malbim really is asking about the most effective tactic for expressing love, and he doesn't want to go down the path of the impossible, so rather that we should seek to benefit the other where it is possible. But let me bring this back down to earth and talk about why this matters for us. If we put Akiva's two statements together, on the one hand, love your fellow as yourself, and on the other, that to live with another, in the words of the Torah, means that ultimately your life takes precedence. We put these together, we get a profound meditation on one of the challenges of being human. Yes, ultimately we all come from a common source. Our souls are the same soul. Our bodies are made from the same earth. But right now, in this world, I am me and you are you. And the space between us is essential to our flourishing. If I live for others to such an extent that I neglect myself, and for some people this really is an emotional challenge, if I do that, I'm really expressing a kind of loathing or at least a rejection of myself. My body, my soul, all that I have are gifts from God. I have an obligation to take care of my physical and emotional and spiritual well-being. And sometimes, even often, that will mean affirming my separation from you. In fact, the Ramchal says in the 2nd chapter of his brilliant Mesilat Yesharim that Hillel's dictum, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me?" should remind me that I am the only one ultimately who can tend to my own spiritual well-being. But of course, the second phrase in that teaching of Hillel is, "If I am only for myself, what am I?" Akiva and Ben Petora both agree that a life without serious engagement with the well-being of others is devoid of goodness and meaning. Here we brush up against one of the mysteries of being. I must be for myself. And yet, in the words of this week's Parsha, V'chai imach, the other must live with me. I take this to mean that without you, I'm not really me. That is, the other gives shape to my life. A life whose focus is on self-satisfaction, we already know that's not ultimately a life. That can't bring us happiness. Many of us have walked into that labyrinth, and we know that it leads nowhere. To live, to truly live, we have to live together and to seek the well-being of one another, recognizing that I am me and you are you. But together, we are one. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great Shabbos.